The bad news is that it's time for you to stop talking to the incredibly interesting person next to you. By the way, this is the fastest I've ever heard an audience actually stop doing that. This is amazing, thank you. And the good news is that we have extremely interesting people on stage for you to listen to and then talk with later on. My name is Andy McAfee. I do research at the IDE and write books with Eric. And I have the happy duty of moderating the panel on good jobs and gigs with my three panelists to my left, old friends and new. Right next to me is Sara Horowitz, who is the emeritus founder of the Freelancers Union here in New York, and the chairman of the New York Federal Reserve. So we're going to ask her a lot of questions. The board. I'm sorry. The
Please, not the banker.
Not the bank, the board. So she's going to tell us what's going to happen with interest rates for the rest of the year, which is going to be really interesting.
You have to wait till the end for that.
Right. We can ask you in December about that, right? Next to Sara is Fred Goff, who is the founder and CEO of Jobcase, which the press likes to refer to as LinkedIn for everybody else, and Fred prefers to refer to as Facebook for your work life. And next to Fred is Lavea Brachman, who is the Vice President of Programs at the Wilson Foundation, which is based in Rochester, New York?
Detroit, Michigan.
Detroit, Michigan.
Close.
This is what we're going to call an attempt at a graceful recovery, and focuses on community issues in Michigan and parts of Pennsylvania. Did I get the two states right?
Upstate New York, Western New York, and Southeast Michigan.
Thank you all for coming. I'd probably be better off just by going to questions right now, right? The three of us, amazingly enough, did have a prep call for this panel that I was not listening to carefully enough. And the title of this panel is Good Jobs and Gigs. And what was weird about our prep call is that we all agreed on some pretty important things, which is, first of all, that we are heading more toward a gig-flavored economy. All of us, I think, agreed that the good old-fashioned, stable 40-hour-a-week, career-long W-2 employment, it's not that it's a thing of the past, but that it is a smaller and smaller share of what Americans actually do for their work lives. And what was even more interesting to me was that none of the four of us wanted to try to bring that completely W-2 stable 40-hour-a-week economy back into existence. We didn't think it would be possible. But even more fundamentally, we didn't, as far as I remember, which was clearly not all that well, we didn't think that it would be a worthwhile or a great thing to do. If we handle our second machine age economy correctly, it can be a better economy, not just for the Silicon Valley capitalists and entrepreneurs, but for working Americans all over the country as well. So with that, Lavea, can I ask you to start off and give us a report from the middle of the country, from the states where you and your colleagues do your work. And can you help us, because a lot of us have been surprised by some of the things that we've seen coming out of those states. Can you help us understand what you're seeing about how deeply and how quickly the economy is changing in these states, and how people's careers and their work lives are also changing over time?
Sure. So I'm with the Wilson Foundation, and as Andrew said, we've established it's based in Detroit, Michigan. We're very new, actually, which gives us a great perspective on the workforce and workforce training. So I would say a couple things, and I'm guessing most of the audience here is not as familiar with the evolution of the economies in the Midwest and workforce needs. So, and we needed to do a deep dive too. These areas that we're focused on, Southeast Michigan and Western New York, that's Detroit, Buffalo, Rochester, those areas have been in transition, economic transition, for decades. And then you overlay on that the changes in technology, and you start to see some really interesting changes going on, even as these areas are starting to make some recovery. So one of the things we zeroed in on as we started to look at how we wanted to build out our strategies was, what is the state of play for middle skill, middle wage jobs? Because we know that that's sort of a sweet spot. Unfortunately, that's a pretty small slice of the pie. It's about 15% in those regions and across the country. And so the question is, how do you really help those people stay where they are with the changing impact of changing technology, but also have career pathways so that there's upward mobility? So that was our starting point. And one of the things we have found, and we're basically doing kind of a lay of the land, but at the same time, because we are a foundation that wants to get to implementation really quickly, we're also looking at best practice workforce training programs. And one of the things that we have found both anecdotally and through our research, through focus groups, is that if people are going to keep up with these jobs, not only do they need to be trained well in certain skills, whether it's metalworking, plumbing, all kinds of range of occupations, they also need what has been referred to as 21st century skills. So that's problem solving, team building, strategic thinking, things like that. And that is a very hard thing to marry, particularly when you're starting with folks that may not have those skills to begin with. So what we're looking for is, in practice, is training programs that will do that. The other thing I'd say is that in our focus groups, we found that straight ladder career paths, and a lot of this probably has to do with the increasing gig economy, it's really not that so much anymore, but something that we've termed rock climbing, or we have adopted a term rock climbing, so that people need skills or they can alter from place to place, not necessarily a straight career ladder upwards. Again, that's often based on these sort of 21st century skills that people need to learn and incorporate into learning on a regular basis. So
rock climbing is harder than climbing a ladder typically.
It is, although in our focus groups, we actually learned that a lot of people were starting to do that at their own workplace. They were finding mentors where they worked, or they had family members that were mentors, and that helped them. Not everyone has that, though, so you have to supply that, and I can talk a little bit later about the increasingly important role of community colleges in supplying some of the ability, particularly to incumbent workers, people who have jobs but want to keep moving up, or young adults that are just getting into the workforce. So some of it's innate, and you learn it, around you, and other places you need to have it incorporated into a more formal learning.
And we want to come back and hear about some of these programs, but are you seeing encouraging signs? Are you seeing green shoots in the communities where you work?
So,
it's easy to kind of get this kind of Rust Belt, just overall gloomy picture of what's going on, and I wonder if that's entirely accurate.
So that's pretty broad generalization, and I would say that absolutely, and I can't speak for all the various Rust Belt areas because there are many more than where we operate, but certainly there is definitely evidence that things are changing. And I'm a new Detroiter, I'm not actually from Detroit, but people say across the board, whether it's in workforce or downtown development, that this seems to be real this time. I would say two more things. One, we also found, and I think this is not surprising, that is a tight labor market. So with that, there are opportunities to work with employers to design new kinds of training programs. We aren't seeing that happen yet, and that's a question I'd actually put back out, is why aren't we seeing more employers wanting to come to the table because there are jobs going unfilled? But at the same time, in our regions, despite the fact that we are seeing improvement, there's a much lower labor force participation rate than in other parts of the country, and that's very concerning and disturbing.
And we definitely want to come back and talk about that. Fred, can we bring you into the conversation? One thing you told us when we were preparing for this panel is that Jobcase is kind of this voice of a very large community of job seekers and people who are looking for employers or employees of different kinds. What are the main themes you're hearing in that huge community-wide conversation?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. Let me.
I was proud of it. Thank you.
And you know where I'm from. That's awesome. Let me ask you.
Fair enough.
Let me ask the
little
audience.
Friendly fire is always welcome on a panel.
We should keep going. Let me ask the audience for some help. Let me help give some context to the voice I bring. If you have ordered a package from Amazon or UPS anytime in the last month and it's been delivered to your house or somewhere, can you raise your hand and keep it up, please? Frickin' Bezos is awesome. All right, keep it up, please. If you've gotten a Starbucks coffee or a Dunkin' coffee, if you're from Boston like me, raise your hand and keep them up, please. Now here's what I'd like you to do. Keep your hands up if you know how the person who delivered that package or the person who poured your coffee got their job and what they're going to do next. Okay. That's why you don't know my company. We have 84 million registered members in this country. We have 2 million a day on the site talking about things going on. When we were saying the press calls us LinkedIn for everyone else, we see ourselves as a compliment. But unlike LinkedIn, when business professionals are about identifying first and second degree connections to help figure out work life, for most people in this country, your first and second degree connections are not going to have the answers that you want. They may not know how it's like to become a nurse. They may not know how to deal with a discrimination boss. They may not know how to ask for a promotion.
Wait, dive in on that. Why not?
People's aspirations are more diverse. Let me give you an example. Let's make it practical. If I've got Pam, who was a cashier and was worried about her job being automated because she's one of these companies that things are coming in, and she says, what else can I do? Right? Who has that answer with her friends? Right? But somebody who's been a cashier who said, I was actually recruited for medical billing because I've been entering numbers in something, and to what Professor Bnyolson was talking earlier, it was surfaced to another person that a lot of those skill sets are the same. They helped each other. Or think of somebody opening a hair salon. How many people might know how to do that? It might be
in their first or second order, their super close network.
But if you open it up, so our whole vision was if we took 130, like we have data scientists, software engineers, data analysts, but whereas you have Anil Bousri's company, Workday, doing an amazing job identifying actionable insights for people like Brian Moynihan to help run his company better, which is great, because Brian Moynihan, I don't know he's speaking here later. I don't know if many people know him. Talk about a person with his heart in the right place. So this is a fabulous CEO to have those insights. But his responsibility in the role he's in is formally with the shareholders and then employees. Our thought was, what if we could take those actionable insights but give it to the actual person? Because one stat out of the Department of Labor is the average 25-year-old has already had 7 jobs. So in an environment where you're moving from place to place to place to place, this is where some of the wage decoupling or wage stagnation is happening. This is where you don't have a person like my grandfather who pushes a broom on a factory floor, and 20 years later his career has been curated into running the factory. You have someone going from Dunkin' to Starbucks to Marriott, start over, start over, start over. And so that's our platform. To give you a sense of numbers, we last month had 25 million people click out to jobs. Last year, there was one company we got 70,000 of our members hired by. So we're pretty active in this community. Every day, there's tens of thousands of applications and signups for gigs, whether it's Lyft or things like that. So I have an interesting perspective that I bring. I have a lot of my own views, but I don't think that's as interesting as the fact if I can amplify the voice that we see in our community.
And what are those voices? What are the most prominent things they're saying?
Yeah, there's massive anxiety.
Anxiety.
Massive anxiety. If you look at the way that we think about it, Dave, is I think you look at these economists across the street from the Bureau of Labor Statistics to the Fed, and then they go to their watering hole, and the Washington Post guy writes about how it's full employment, and to use a phrase that someone said on this stage earlier, bullshit. Are you kidding me? Turn to the third page of The Economist, and the Fed is going to tell you that 47% of households do not have enough savings to cover an unexpected $400 expense. And the gig economy today is not a choice of I want to be a 1099 and I do this instead. It's on top of that. So when we came into the year, we had a survey. And here's some stats from our community to put it in stats. So you can go online and read what they're saying. 60% thought 2018 was going to be better for their family from a work perspective than 2017. Okay. Now, if you think how strong the economy was in December, and to have that kind of an expectation of the new year, 27% thought they were fairly paid.
27.
40% were planning to take 2 or more jobs to try to make ends meet. So it's not, do I drive for Lyft or Uber or Thumbtack? It's, thank God Lyft is providing me this opportunity to get the extra income I need to make things work. And so there's anxiety. And so what our view is, though, at Jobcase, to wrap it up and not monopolize this question, I think that all of these anxieties that are coming at us, AI and automation, and we're in this room talking about a lot of these issues, and future of work has become a thing, in my opinion, because it finally hit the coasts. I was in a Future of Work conference, and everyone's talking about what's happening to how it's going to replace software coders and what happened to Wall Street analysts and 360,000 hours of lawyers we heard about. And it's like, what are we going to do? And I'm sitting here coming from Toledo, coming from Detroit, and said, welcome to the club, man. It's been going on since the 50s. And there's been a blind eye to it. So it's just reached the coast, and now we're talking about it, and that's very healthy. But all of these things that are very anxious, if they're harnessed, are incredibly empowering, incredibly empowering. The automation that's going to put you out of a job as a cashier is also making education free and available online, right? And we can go through all these examples, but there's an obligation to try to figure out how this information can be surfaced to people and how they can navigate it. And there's a lot of organizations that have a view of how to do that kind of top-down. My organization has a view of have a platform where people can help each other. And we probably need both. So I think there's a lot of optimism. But I'd wrap up by saying I think there's a corollary. I feel like it's when you look at AI and machine learning and these great things you heard Professor Brynjolfsson talk about today, I think there's a metaphor to nuclear energy like maybe back in the 40s or 50s. I think that it's this incredible power, but do you want to use it to build a bomb or to power France, right? What do you want to do with this skill set, and who are you going to help with it? And it takes a lot of thinking.
Sara, you were freelancing before freelancing was cool. You founded the Freelancers Union
20 years ago.
20 years ago. Are you surprised by anything you're hearing here so far?
No, not at all. Although I would say it's interesting, one thing I've noticed is when we are talking about the frustration of when did future of work kind of hit, middle America, it was always on the coast. Freelancers have been on the coasts and really struggling throughout that 20-year period too. And I think really the defining theme is anxiety. But you know what I would really like to go back to the beginning of your framing. So why is it that I started the Freelancers Union, and I agree with you that we can't go back, and that has been sometimes a controversial statement. And I think that the reason is...
Do you catch flack sometimes when you say that?
Yes, no, whatever. But I would say that what is important is
Stupid
that...
questions, but polite way to just say
But,
that. Thanks, Sara.
Yeah, but I say that lovingly. But what I think is really important, though, is...
Why did Eric get the docile panelists tonight?
Okay, now I'm going to talk. So so what is really significant, though, is that the conundrum for people who care about what is going to happen to people who work in America is that we have a set of labor and employment laws in place, and it's called the New Deal and the Great Society. And it's in tatters, but it still exists. And so you have millions of people still covered by that. And we know that we need a future safety net, but it's not here. And what we haven't done is said, that's okay, we're going to take that New Deal and that Great Society and we're going to update it. Everyone's going to transition and we're all going to be okay. And so I think that's why we're in, that to me is the crux of why Washington can't solve these problems and no state capital in America is able to solve that. And so what you have, understandably, are people, and this is what I've been really focused on, is how do we build this next safety net? But when I say it, I'm not, no diss. I love all those Roosevelts. I like Teddy, I like FDR, Eleanor. There's not one of them I don't like. But we have to then say, this next safety net is going to be profoundly different. It's going to be structured differently. And I think we have to make sure we have a little mantra that we say to ourselves when we propose things. Are we trying to retrofit the New Deal? And what we have to say is you can't do that. So sometimes when we talk about portable benefits, if you close your eyes, it's like it sounds kind of new and parts of it are new and parts of it are like, well, we'll just attach it to a bunch of employers. And I think that if you say to me, what's that crisis of anxiety and what's the antidote? The antidote is human connection. And that one of the cultural things we have to change by changing structure is that people have to be connected to one another. While we are connected more than ever through Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and Jobcase and Freelancers Union, but the difference is that we have to start to give these new kinds of organizations a job. And that job is one of delivering benefits, job training, because when you live in Middle America, and I believe that a lot of people in Middle America don't like the term Rust Belt, so I think that when you live in Middle America, you want to be connected to your faith-based organization, your ethnic organization, your immigrant association, and we should be saying that this is as old as de Tocqueville. Let's go back and start to think about this, because what we've done is we've internalized a very lonely place of hyper-individualism that's serving nobody. And I think that hyper-individualism is actually worse for people than any problem about artificial intelligence and change in technology.
Okay, so I want to ask you to dive in on this, and then please, Lavea and Fred, jump in on this question as well. Can you help us understand the main ways in which our current safety net is most badly mismatched for the current and the future world of work? And then to the extent that you have policy changes that you keep recommending, what are those?
Yeah, so I'll just give one example, and I just have to say, it's so nice that the Fed keeps coming up in conversation. I was at one of these, Fed has 12 regional banks, and there was a whole conversation on workforce training. And we were having this kind of talk, and I said, anybody who's interested in workforce training, can you meet me here at the end of the panel? And there were 10 people, and after the conference, we did a conference call, and they were all on workforce training boards. They were the people who have to make it work. And I learned this really interesting thing, which is, just now imagine you're a G something. Everybody, I don't know, government, you're that's your career. And your job is to place people either through the federal funding or state, or the people who know workforce will know this way better than I. And it turns out you're the line person. This is your job, the way that you will be evaluated. Success is when I place this person in a job, they have a W-2 and they get benefits.
Really, that's the success criteria.
Yes. And so what you start to say is, the reason that's going to really make it hard to do any rock climbing, because you actually have to be independently wealthy to figure out how you're going to chart this 3 steps ahead. And so what's interesting, so put that over here. Freelancers Union has a program called Spark, which is essentially a platform. And what we've done is, and this is continuing, it's now in 30 cities. You identify yourself as a leader. I'm a leader. Freelancers Union develops curriculum based on what freelancers want, and now it's iterative because there's a committee of leaders who say what it is, and people want to know some really critical skills. How do I market myself? How do I do my taxes? What kind of contract do I need? And then they start to identify, imagine these are organic meetups around training and the skills that you need. Then somebody is good at marketing. Somebody is good at doing the curriculum. The leader can do as much as they want or as little as they want. Guess how many foundations funded that? 0. Guess how much government support, though this has been incredibly successful, hundreds of people are getting this, and what they get is a meal, so that you get to have some wine and beer, you get to hang out with other people, it's less alienated. You, the human being, got to decide what was the training that actually you needed. And so it's been, because we at Freelancers Union are good at figuring out our own revenue models, it's a sustainable model. But it's a really good example that the workforce world was I can't hear you. But it goes back to the point about the lack of groups. Because we're a democracy, and we work best when we have groups that can articulate to the government. And so I think that's a perfect example of where we're in this real mismatch. And when you listen to workforce people, what they'll say to you is, I've gotten all these employers together, and I'm trying to figure out a program, and I'm connecting them. And I think the one thing at least everyone agrees on is it's just completely broken and doesn't work.
Can I ask?
So, yeah, I'll jump in. So I would agree the workforce training program is very fragmented everywhere. And
are you as negative about it as Sara is? Is it possible to be more negative about it than
Well,
Sara is?
I mean, I think she's talking about several different pieces of it, and I think it's important to break it down a little bit. I mean, I think the government sanctioned pieces are pretty broken down and fragmented.
Interesting.
The workforce training. But I do think there are many programs out there that aren't necessarily tied to the workforce training, the federal and state workforce training programs that can be fixed, and what it requires, and I would build on a point you were making, I think we are at an interesting stage where it's, I think, appropriate and maybe exciting to look at, is there a new dynamic emerging between employers and employees? Can we be thinking about, the old paradigm was unions, employers, and that's clearly not going to work anymore. I mean, they can't sit on different sides of the table. They have to be working collaboratively.
Yeah, but I just have to say, like, when you look at all this collaboration for the UAW and the auto industry, who, like, it's not that it isn't, and I don't believe that you cannot have unions because they're part and parcel of democracy. Every dictatorship in the world, the first thing they do is get rid of unions, so I don't exactly think that's a good thing. So I just think that what I agree, what you're saying is, like, we need to be around the table with a framework of building and being collaborative, but unions.
Yeah,
have a
not
long
advocating
history of collaborative.
to dismantle
Yes.
the entire union structure in this country
Right.
at all. But I
Or any
think
other
that
thing.
in the reality, in the practical world back in Detroit, there are opportunities for for employers who can't fill their jobs to be talking with community colleges, to even be starting to work with UAW and others to identify how do we solve this together, because frankly, we're up against the global economy and we're all going to lose unless we find new ways to collaborate. Now, that is definitely not coming right now in our experience from policymakers. It's more coming from folks who are at high schools trying to create career tech ed programs, community colleges that are being approached by particularly small, medium-sized businesses
To say, let's design a curriculum.
let's design
that'll
this
give us the
together
people.
because we're not getting what we need. And I was just at a meeting last week, a very well-known, recognized nationally community college in Southeast Michigan, and some small, medium-sized businesses working in the metal industry. And they came to the former president and said, we came to you guys and you couldn't help us. So there is a big disconnect here. So we're actually, as a foundation, this is hot off the presses and we haven't implemented this yet, but we are in conversations to figure out how can we sort of broker some relationships here where the community college can better serve these small, medium-sized businesses, help people who are in the workforce who want to come to community colleges get trained for jobs that exist. And that's not totally new. We have apprenticeships in this country, not as well developed as in Europe, but there are many work-based learning programs that are being developed. This is even more closely, we hope, aligned between businesses' needs and training needs.
Yeah, let me jump off of that. So the one thing that I want to lead from there is the small and mid businesses talking about education. Here's what's working. Business is working. Capitalism is working. It's out of balance. We need to do some things to bring it back, but capitalism works, and it's addressing this. So
Stop for a second. Would the
I'm just getting going.
No, but I love that. I love that thought. Do the people looking for a job in your community, would they agree with what you just said?
Intrinsically, implicitly, intuitively, yes. But let me explain. 27% of people are worried about automating their jobs. Okay. If you're standing at home plate in a Little League field and the whole team is throwing balls at you, it's hard to talk about what you're going to do after the game, right? That's what's going on with people when you say, are they thinking about this? But here's what's happening. We live in a very interesting time. While all this change is going on, we have the least confidence in our public institutions, and I would argue for a reason, right? And if you look at what's happening, and it's interesting that we're talking about grown-ups and adults and what they're doing, but that's going to move pretty quick through the system. And we look at the failure in K through 12 that's going on today. It's a very typical thing that's happening in our K through 12 today that happened in business all the way back to when ICE was invented. And Jim Utterbeck at MIT, you taught me about this like longer ago than I like to admit. But typically when new innovation comes out in technology, old things try to use it in very simple ways that fit into their model. So look at all this technology we have to teach people how to learn better. And you know what our K through 12 is doing? They're getting funding to put an iPad so they can do the exact same work they did last year on an iPad instead of a paper. That's innovation. That's not going to work, guys. This is a new era, and we're still teaching people like Plato taught Aristotle in a small room and wrote in pillars of information. And the skill sets we need, what the prior panelist was talking about, soft skills, these critical skills, are how do you problem solve? How are you critically interesting? How can you change your entire mindset from moment to moment? Because I guarantee your kids, or if you're young enough out there to be starting your career, you're going to have not 3 careers over your lifetime. You're going to have like 8, 9, 10, and you're going to have to constantly retrain. And what is our K through 12 doing? So we have a stagnancy that's going on, and what the strikes are about are more time, more money. It's not about changing the structure. Okay. And so what's happening? We're starting to get funding. My competition is going through the roof. On-demand labor platforms, more funding about things that are attacking new business models similar to Udacity and Khan Academy and edX and MIT. And so the capital is flowing to this whole problem because the governmental institutions aren't solving it. And to your point, anybody who's looking to have a workforce 5 years down the line, let alone 20, understands they better get involved in this, and it's happening. So our push would be, if you're in a position of any kind of authority or influence at all, we really need to get whoever has some decision authority in any governmental institutions to open up their mindset to having business and industry be part of the solution, because they are way ahead of what's going on in the public landscape.
That's great. I want to open it up for questions from all of us in the room in just a minute, so please be thinking about that. I want to ask each of you one final question before we throw it open to the entire room. And it's a little bit of a lightning round, so because we're getting short on time, shorter answers are better. I'm going to give each of you a magic wand that you can wave and make one change to our current labor force, workforce environment. And I want it to be the change that you think would make the biggest difference. And you don't get to, with what that one wish, ask for 100 wishes. We're going to take that off the table.
Biggest difference.
Yep, sorry. I'm going to grant you one wish to make the things, the challenges we've been talking about addressable or ease the challenges. What would you wave your wand and want?
Well, so I should say that most of the comments I've been making are really about those who aren't getting four-year college degrees. So this is about post-secondary people who don't have four-year college. And for many of them, there are a lot of other barriers to doing that. It's transportation, it's childcare. And so I would actually, and it almost goes without saying that we need so many other ways to train and support people. So I would say that you'd need a magic wand to fix those sort of ancillary issues. So I would put that out there as how do these people actually, deal with challenges in their own lives to get to where they want to go in their workforce training, in their job career.
Just the challenges of getting through the day, getting through the week, so that you can
There's
go.
So many times, yeah, and a lot of community colleges are putting together support network to Sarah's point. Different kinds of safety net that you need at this, in our society now to even make it to workforce training, to your job. So.
Depends how broad it gets to be. I suppose if it's a broad answer, I would go back to the K through 12. That solves everything.
You'd wave your wand at K through 12.
Yeah, if we could fix K through 12, you know what? I mean, don't do this probably, but if you bring up the lights and look at the demographics of this audience having this conversation, do you really think that we have equality of opportunity right now, which is what this country is based on? We need to fix that, and imagine all the talent that gets unlocked and the productivity and the solutions that happen and all that. But we're teaching the wrong curriculum in the wrong way with some of the wrong people in the wrong bill. It's got to be fixed. If we fix that, it would be huge.
You're just amazed that you're just depressed about the waste of human capital that's going on.
That's absolutely, and it's a moral tragedy. It's an economic hardship, and who's working on this problem in the right way? Who's working this problem other than let's get more funding for what we did 2 years ago, but this time put a plug in the wall? I mean, come on. Separately, I'll give I'm going to cheat and do a footnote. If companies would open up their employee jackets to each other and we have common apps, Jobcase would be a great solution. Maybe there's another. If we would have that, the friction of the labor force moving from place to place would unlock a ton of value. It's kind of like like in A Beautiful Mind, right? Change the way you're thinking about it. Don't go for one solution but satisfied. But if we stop thinking about my labor as my silo, the smart young lady back here asked a question about our company's going to train better and all this. Part of the problem is when you get to less expensive labor forces, a lot of employers are afraid of putting too much training in because it's going to go to another company. They have to do it anyways, because if everybody does that, then the other training will come back to you too. We have to get involved in a fluid labor force, but to do that, the ecosystem has to open up. That would be tactical. Strategic would be K through 12.
Okay, one wave of the wand.
Great question, by the way.
Wait, are you still trolling me, or do you mean this
No,
one?
I mean it. I really mean it. Okay, so I would bring Teddy Roosevelt back. And
Who you love.
Who I love, and this is why he was watching the country industrialize, and he became really worried about the rural communities and their economics. And so he lit a fire under the cooperative movement. So if you look at the agricultural cooperatives, they're not quaint and charming. They are like billion-dollar industries that have have supported, and if you go to your grocer's freezer, you'll find Land O'Lakes and a bunch of other companies, the Ace Hardware, that you'd be surprised by. And so what I would do is I would have Teddy would make it so that we would have a cabinet position called Transition to the Next Economy, and it would have a central pot of money, but it would be platform-based, so it'd be really decentralized. It would get rid of every middle piece of bureaucracy and would be focused really locally, and then the local communities would have to have groups that had expertise and had a template for which groups would get funding, and they would do it just like the agricultural ones. So you'd start with the basic funding, you'd see who did well, you'd see the needs for the next intermediaries, but it would be central and super decentral and very little in the middle structurally.
So this would be trust busting for the 21st century.
Yes.
So
No, but it's empowered because it's through groups that people democratically belong to.
That Teddy understood that fact.
And he understood that. And so what we keep doing is employers are so critically important, and without employers, this would be a ridiculous thing to say. But I think that it's about democracy and the economy and figuring out how we put that back in, because that's how we'll flourish, and we have an opportunity to do that.
Teddy would have nailed this.
I think so.
Yep, that's fantastic.